Welcome to Because We Love You, episode 2 of this series. We have started and we are talking about optimism today, and I'm very excited and optimistic that you are going to learn a lot. We have learned a lot.
Yes,
it's been very fun to see what science says about optimism. And it's interesting that sometimes when you start researching or looking into, it's almost like things start happening for you to realize how important it is to be optimistic.
Yeah, you notice it more for sure.
Yeah. So it was just this week that I was at a relative's house and I had kind of sat down getting ready to have some conversation, and it was immediately like, are you ready for the end? And I'm like, what do you mean? The end of what? Yeah, it's the end. It's the end of the world. Like, we are so close to World War III. World War III? Okay. Mind you, I don't really watch the news. I don't really know what's going on in that realm. I got a lot of things going on. Got 3 kids.
Yeah.
Like to have fun. So just really focused on planning the next trip.
Yeah.
Not really focused on like what's going on. I'm like, yeah, at any moment, a nuclear bomb is ready to be launched and coming after me. And I'm like, wow, this is a lot. And this particular person was like, the only thing you can be ready to do is die. Like, we just have to be ready to die. Are you ready to die? Like, the only thing that's important is our family and that we're ready to die. And I'm like, that's a lot. And you know, all of that may be true. I mean, that might be the facts. And I think we live in a world where there are a lot of little negative things that we can see, and we're like, oh wow, the state and condition of our world is sad.
Yes.
But to sit there and look at the future as completely doom.
Yeah, so hopeless and bad.
That's so hard, and that is not the life that we are called to live, and science tells us that is not going to benefit us, right?
Yeah, and we could probably all think of people in our lives like that. Like, you know, hearing your story just brings to mind a few people where it's just everything when they think about the future. It's like, yes, good things and bad things are going to happen, but when we're talking about optimism and just kind of thinking about this conversation, it's just realizing or having the mindset, the belief, the cognition that everything's gonna be okay. You know, even if things don't work out perfectly, just believing that good things are to come, you know, feeling hopeful about the future. I think that's really important. Also, I think some of us lean more naturally, just kind of as a caveat here. Like, I understand that some of us, it's easier, you know, and kind of lean naturally towards optimism, and other people a little more towards pessimism. And I think it's just something you need to be aware of and to work on.
And yes. And that's what we're here today, is to kind of work on and figure out why. I like, you know, what you said, because optimism is not just a feeling, you know, because maybe you don't feel good about the future. Maybe you're not as happy about the future, but it doesn't mean you can't be optimistic, because optimism is more of the long-term cognition and what we learn. So that's
that's a great point. Thinking like we can be sad in a moment, but still optimistic about the future and hopeful, and
like
that's
good
really
things
great.
are going to turn around and be better. So tell me about that study, though. I love that study about the rhinovirus.
Yes.
One, because I love that people volunteered to get like
a virus stuck in their nose.
I want to get paid for that.
Would totally
that would
do
be
that.
Yes, that would be so fun.
And I would definitely not do it.
You know, kind of like we had the hurricane party, we could just have a rhinovirus party.
Oh god.
Right? Who wants to sign up for the rhinovirus party?
It's like, it reminds me of the old days when parents, when we were little, would do like chicken pox parties. Like, one person in the neighborhood had it, and then everyone would bring all their kids over to get it.
We've talked about this before, Stacy. This is where you take the thing that you don't want to do and you make it fun, right?
It fun.
Yeah. So like temptation bundling, right. Didn't we talk about this, folks? Yes.
Season,
So we take, the rhinovirus, but if we do it together and we have popcorn, and it makes it fun.
But to be clear, we do not have to get rhinovirus. There's no benefit to that. So
no, but for this study there was.
Okay.
So tell us about it.
Yeah, the study, it was interesting because, as Jade mentioned, they took the rhinovirus and put it up people's noses, swabbed it up there. So they had participants volunteer to do that. And then essentially they tracked a lot of things. And before the study, they, did a lot of measures related to like mood and happiness and health and, tons of different factors. And kind of to the point that we were just talking about, the difference between happiness and optimism. They found that people who were happy, so the mood-based one, like cheerful and feeling good, were less likely to get it. How weird, right? That your mood before exposure was related to likeliness of getting it, which is crazy. So people who were in a good mood before were less likely to get it, and it was less severe. But on the other hand, and optimism didn't matter for those things, but optimism does matter in the long run, they found. So when kind of after recovery and then looking out on those individuals, like overall well-being and things like leadership skills and ability to cope and recover and bounce back, the optimists fare better. So interesting.
It is interesting. I want to be both. So I want to be the
I'm with you
cheerful,
on that.
happy person that doesn't get it.
Yeah.
But unless I can get it with like 10 of my closest friends. And then I also want to be the optimistic person who does what, if I get it, then it's all going to turn out good and it's going to be okay. I love the body and how it all comes together because it really comes down a lot to cortisol. I've told you this before, but cortisol is like that natural prednisone. If you know anything about prednisone, it suppresses your immune system. Yeah. So when we can really control our adrenal glands, like hashtag control your adrenals. Okay, when you can
that's
control,
really going to catch on. I think it's going to be the next.
I'm good at I'm good at the hashtags.
Yes.
So when you really can catch on to that, then it really does. Like if you don't have that suppression of your immune system, you're going to be happier. You're going to be healthier. You're not going to get the rhinovirus. I might not even get it, even if you put it up my nose.
I didn't know what you're going to say after put it up. But I'm glad you stuck with nose.
My nose. But I love that. But it's with all health too. The research is endless with optimism and how it lowers your blood pressure. Your heart, your cardiovascular health, that's the particular organ that it truly helps the most is when we have a better outlook, when we have that lower cortisol, our blood pressure and everything is so much better. Blood pressure is so important. This is just like a hashtag care about your blood pressure.
Control your blood pressure, control your adrenals. Wow, you're being very bossy today, I feel like.
Man, this is very medical. But like I often tell patients, I'm like, your blood pressure is like the pressure washer inside your body. Yeah. Like it is, blood's just swooping through the arteries and banging up against pipes, your arteries, your pipes. And, the higher your blood pressure, the more pressure on that plaque. And it's going to shoot one loose and go to your brain or shoot one loose and go to your heart. And so it's intense. Yes, it is intense. I mean,
do you say that to your patient?
Yes, and it's very serious.
It does sound very
serious conversations about blood pressure.
For sure. I don't want my pipes exploding and going to my brain or whatever you just
Your pipes
said.
that you could explode. That's an aneurysm. Yeah. But and blood pressures are if you have one of those weak pipes, it could burst.
Well, my current mood, I'm trying to remain optimistic, but my current mood is a little sad. So can you tell us some good news?
And also, I love this. Like people who are more optimistic, they have less readmissions into the hospital. Isn't that crazy? You can still have the thing, but if you leave the hospital saying, I'm not coming back here, hit the road, Jack, and don't you come back no more, no more, no more, no more.
There's the singing. Yeah. I knew it was coming. That's interesting. And when you think not even from a health perspective and just like being happier, maybe even mental health, happier being at home, but even the cost of readmission to the hospital, like that's a big deal if that's something we change through, optimistic mindset.
And also with your health, optimistic people, which this seems like a correlation that would happen, better mental health. Yeah. I mean, less depression. Yeah. But what I find interesting is even optimistic and pessimistic people get the same diseases. Yeah. Get the same mental health issues, but it's how they deal with it, how they cope with it, and we see the optimistic people, they have hope in the future. So they are more prone to say, I want to go to counseling. I want to try that therapy. I want to try that medicine. I want to to do exercise. Tell me what to do. I want to not isolate myself, and I
Yeah.
want to be around people. I want to learn. There is hope in the future. And we see that those people who learn coping strategies actually do so much better than the pessimistic person. Like, counseling's not going to help me.
Yeah.
Medicine's not going to help me.
Right. That's something I just saw over and over again in the literature too, as I was reading, is just that, like you said, coping strategy. The optimism seems to be related to choosing better coping strategies. So
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah.
But as we're kind of on benefits of optimism here related to health, the one that I really enjoyed reading about was how optimism is related to both career satisfaction and career success. So I was reading about a study by Seligman who did this. It was the mid 80s, but the study was really cool. He worked with an insurance company called MetLife, and they were having some trouble kind of retaining and getting good people. And so when they were hiring, they were, of course, doing like aptitude tests and things like that. But he added in an optimism measure because that's something he was interested in. And what was really cool was that when they tracked those individuals over a 2-year period, the optimists were selling 31% more insurance than the pessimist. So that's a huge difference.
That's great.
And even more mind-blowing to me was the fact that when they looked at people who did poorly on the aptitude test, right? And they had to end up hiring some of those people anyway, and they tracked those individuals over the 2-year period, the optimists were more successful by 57% than the pessimist. So even taking out ability or looking at ability, it makes me think like maybe optimism can serve as a protective factor or can help kind of overcome some disadvantages. Maybe
I love that. I mean, that should like make everybody so excited, because if optimism, an attitude, a thinking strategy, a coping strategy, honestly, can actually create this performance, then what hope is there? Because sometimes I think, my skill may not be the best, or my education is not the high. I look at people, I look at other medical doctors, I look at PhDs. I'm sitting beside a doctor, folks. But I look at you and your education and how smart you are. I'm like, I just, my skills aren't there. But what we see is that it's not just that, it's our attitude towards, I can be better. I can do that. I can learn that. I can learn to sell. I mean, you may be more gifted, but I've got the perseverance or the grit to do this. So that's really cool, and that should be a motivation for us, and something that we speak life into people. Like, it's not as much about your natural ability as it is your attitude towards the future and what you're doing. So I love it.
Yeah, and you see it not only in careers but also in schools.
Yeah. The literature says that people who were more optimistic actually had higher GPAs.
Yeah, that's big for students as we think about our kiddos in school and just the power of their beliefs about the future.
Yeah. And, I'm big on like saying the same thing every morning and having my little chant. I've posted that before, but like we have like a little repetition thing that we do every morning. And I think about that because basically, I mean, it's not, I'm going to do bad today, I'm not going to be enough. It's all good things. So like maybe, like I am enough, I am smart enough, today will be good, expectant, optimistic about the day, and perhaps that, that even changes. With the school though, what I found really, really cool was a study that they did with optimistic persons and pessimistic persons who actually failed. So they did bad on something, they did bad on a test, and that the optimistic person, even in failure, still has a better outcome. They still feel better about themselves in the future than a pessimistic person. So a pessimistic person, whether they fail or succeed, they're always like, oh, well, that was just happenstance. Like, there's no way I could have done well on that test. It's never about them as a person. They always kind of blame it on something.
Other things. That's so interesting, because when I think about, if you look in the field of clinical psychology, they talk a lot about how we explain our failures. And so it seems also, as we read related to that study, that optimists and pessimists explain their failures differently, right? So the idea is, like you said, people who are optimistic, when they succeed, it's something about who they are. Like, I did well on that test because I tried so hard and, kind of just put the effort into it. But when they fail, it's more situational. Like, well, that was a really hard test, and next time I'll do better. But with pessimists, you see the opposite, where, when they fail, it's, I'll never be able to do that in the future. I can't do that. I'm just not a good student, kind of having that mindset. But then, when they think about when they do well, it's more about, oh, well, it was just an easy test. So you kind of see that reverse reasoning. And so it's really important that when we fail, we see those failures as very specific. Like, yes, I failed that one time. That doesn't mean I'm a failure. And that they're, not only specific, but temporary. Like, yes, that one time, but I'm going to get over it. I can do it in the future. And it's not my fault, right?
Yeah.
Like, of course we have to take blame when we weren't prepared and things like that. But when we take everything kind of internally and it's just me and I could never do that, then you can imagine why that's problematic.
I mean, the most successful people in the world, man, don't they have such great failures? Great failures in the fact that, like, we look at them and we're like, what if that had happened to me? Would I've gotten back up? Would I've tried out again? Would I have done it again? And so we just have to use, if we have the optimistic that we can be great, we will be great. The future is great. Bad things will happen. Failures will happen. But our outlook will be that good things are to come. So
yeah, and it makes people put in more effort. I think it's so related to that factor. You kind of alluded to it, but perseverance, just even when you fail, getting back up and trying again. And like you said, all those cool stories of famous people who just, Michael Jordans and the Albert Einsteins and Elon Musk's, like all of the things that went wrong, but they, use that to learn and get back up and do better because they had hope about the future.
And we talk about them a lot, but then I see so many like small town heroes, but people in my life that I look at and I'm like, they could have used that as like, oh, nope, not going to try that again. Or even ourselves, like we have to tell ourselves sometimes, it's like, oop, that didn't work out, you know, like,
keep
but
going.
but keep up. If at first you don't succeed, then dust yourself off and try again. Dust yourself off and try.
That's right. Put that on next time you fail and give you a little motivation.
That's how I remain optimistic, is to speak and think of songs.
Yeah.
Makes me
happy.
We
all know that.
And optimistic about the future. But, okay, so there was also this, in the reading, there was this really cool principle that Tali Sharot, she's a psychologist who talked about this, but the optimism bias. And I thought it was super cool because this is a bias that we don't ask for necessarily. And the 80% of us on average, when they look at it, 80% of us have this, that we are more prone to optimism, which is cool because we clearly see the benefits of it. But also it just reminds me that we were made to see the good. We were made to that we have this bias that pushes us to say the future is good, the future is great.
Yeah, and what I loved about her TED Talk on the optimism bias was just some of the specific examples that she gave, and thinking about things like when you ask, newlyweds to predict whether or not they'll get divorced. Newlyweds say there's a 0% chance. Like most people, 80% of people say 0%, right? Which is great. I don't think you shouldn't marry someone if you're like 100% chance this isn't going to work out.
If they probably did have a little bit of a percentage in the back of their mind.
Sure.
Like, there's only 50. No.
I have to say 0, but but even though, it's a well-known fact that about half of marriages end in divorce, people don't predict that or think that's going to play. Yeah, not me, right? And even illnesses and sicknesses, things like cancer, right? Most people underestimate their chances of getting those types of things.
Even in her research, it was interesting that your optimism bias is always higher than for other people.
Yeah.
So
that
you
doesn't
think,
apply to me.
like I can smoke and it kills people. It does. Lung cancer is real, but it won't happen to me.
Yeah.
So, and what are we doing? Like being careful of a little bit of that optimism bias for us. Like that's not going to happen. I'm not going to get the banging arteries to my
the banging pipes in my body.
Not me.
I think you make a really valid point there. As we think about this finding about optimism, yes, it's good. Yes, there are so many benefits, but, sometimes it can be a little problematic that we, underestimate things like that, because in some situations that, that bias could lead to problems. I know one example she gave that was cool was like the firefighters who, when things go wrong in a fire, come out saying, oh, we didn't think it was going to go that way. They kind of thought things were going to go better than they were. So in a specific case like that, right, optimism is not really helpful, and you need to be a little more realistic. And so we can probably all think of ways in our lives where, like, yes, overall optimism, we're all for it, do it. We're going to talk about working on it and improving it. But there are some situations, of course, where you really need to reflect on maybe data and reality and think about.
I found one of her examples was even that her budget. Like, she includes optimism bias in her budget. She's like, yeah, that's being very optimistic that we're only going to spend this amount of money. Like, we
that
need
we're
to
only going to go to La Fiesta once a week. Can you talk about?
It has been twice this week, or 3 times, just twice.
Yeah, at least.
Yeah.
Well, I've eaten 3 times there in the last 7 days. I'm not going to lie.
You cheated on me?
I did. I'm sorry.
Oh my goodness, she cheated! She cheated on me with La Fiesta.
Anyway, we clearly underestimate the amount of money we spend at La Fiesta.
Yeah, I don't even look anymore. I'm just like, just put it on the tab. We'll pay at the end of the week.
Just don't think about it.
Yeah, so that's really cool. And when she was talking about this, she was like, how do we even know this? And they have a functional MRI machine, which we've talked about before, when it looks at the brain, and like certain areas would light up during certain stimuli. And it was really interesting. It was the left and right inferior frontal gyrus. Gyrus.
Yeah.
Why do I want to say gyrus? Like a guy, but gyrus.
Phonetically,
gyrus.
yeah.
So, but the left always
say
lit up.
IFG for short. Interior frontal gyrus. Left IFG.
Left IFG.
There you go.
The left, whenever you had like that good stimuli, would just light up in everyone, just across the board. Didn't matter if you were pessimistic. It didn't matter if you were optimistic. It would just show.
Yeah. So it's the unexpected positive news that just lit it up.
And then you had the right side, that the optimistic people, there was no activity. Like, you could tell them that unexpected bad news, that unexpected any type of bad stimuli, and it just didn't ring a bell for them. It didn't light up, which is interesting. And so they were like, wonder if we can like maneuver this. Wonder if we can kind of trick the person. So they used transmagnetic stimulation, which is really cool, because they're actually using that for depression now, and they're studying it in other mental health disorders to elicit different parts of the brain.
Yeah, it's super cool, because they just essentially disrupt activity in a certain area of the brain. So it's like that area is damaged or not functioning properly, and they can, do it for a certain amount of time, and then it goes back to normal. Yeah. It's amazing. Science is so cool.
So in this area, they did it for like 30 minutes, and what they realized is that they could actually get rid of optimism bias.
Yeah, so if they disrupted the left side, optimism bias went away. If they disrupted the right side in the pessimist, right, they were a little more optimistic.
So then they were like, do we really want to get rid of optimism bias? And the answer is clearly no. And they realized that too, because there's just so much benefit in that. But what that did show is that if you can decrease optimism bias, then you can also increase it.
Yeah, so we can train ourselves to be more optimistic. And, of course, you and I believe that strongly, or we wouldn't be talking about it today. Just like, fingers crossed, hope you're optimistic. If not, you're screwed.
And, just like a personal little application, I didn't, I thought like maybe growing up, I was like more optimistic. Like I'm going to do great things. I've got a great future planned out for me. And then like, as you get older, I guess that midlife crisis hits, and then you realize like life is hard. There's a lot of realities.
Hard things happen.
And so your idea and your life, things change a little bit in
Mhm.
that you're not as so woohoo.
Yeah.
But this brings it back that we have to work on it and we have to get that back. We got to get our mojo back. We
Let's
got to
get
get
our
our
mojo.
optimism mojo back.
Yes.
Everybody out there, and us too, because,
Yeah.
I'm not perfect with it. And I'm
Yeah.
just now trying to retrain myself to the future is great.
Yeah.
We don't have to perish in our midlife crisis.
Yeah.
We can come back.
We're not even at midlife yet, Jade. Let's calm it down on the midlife crisis.
I might be there. I don't know.
Oh gosh.
Because I do.
Okay, before we go dark,
I'm
let's
not
talk
too
about
dark.
this.
I'm excited. I mean, 37 times 2 is a lot.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Moving on as we talk about
Oh, but
optimism.
you're 40 times 2, Sid. That's a
Not
real
yet. To be clear, not yet. Anyway, so as we think about training ourselves to be more optimistic, one thing that I really liked in the literature was research looking at what optimists and pessimists pay attention to. And so, yes, so there was a study done in the early 2000s by Isaacowitz. That's a mouthful.
Yeah, I know.
Isaacowitz. That's
Smart
cool,
people
though.
have really cool names.
I know. It makes it really hard for us to talk
Optimistic
about them.
people just have Breeback, Lipowski.
No. Yeah, that's
But you can
right.
pronounce it. So
Yeah, it's easier, phonetic, Anyway, they did this really cool eye tracking study with optimist and pessimist and presented pleasant and unpleasant cues. And when you tracked people's eye movements, pessimists spent more time looking at the unpleasant cues. And I just think that's so interesting and powerful in terms of, what we pay attention to and then what we remember. Because if you're really paying attention to and looking more at negative things, those things are going to stick. And of course, you're going to have a less hopeful view of the future. Think about an important application, like you said, with the news stuff, the story you gave at the beginning, and even scrolling through social media, what are you noticing? Are you noticing, your friends who are having successes and having babies and getting new jobs and all of that happy, fun stuff? Or are you paying more attention to and getting stuck on the bad stuff, the negative stuff? I think that matters.
And we know that it's a lot easier to talk and to report on bad news and whatnot, even with the news. But what you feed will grow. So, I mean, if you're feeding the side of negative, and I just think if you have a problem with self-image and you keep feeding yourself with beautiful, perfect models and looking at every single thing that is perfect, then that's going to grow, and you're just going to get more and more pessimistic and more like your future is not bright. Or if you choose good things, that's gonna grow. The healthy things, the science things, the literature that shows that, okay, maybe you're not aptitude test is low, but your optimism test is high, and that can give you so much encouragement. So that's really one practical thing. So if you want optimism to grow, what are you looking at? What are you feeding?
Yeah, because it makes me think, even in everyday life, what do you notice? Do you notice the helpers, or do you notice the people who harm, right? Some people just have that mindset where it's like, oh, look, the youth these days, right? They're just a mess and they can't do anything right. Or are you noticing the good stories, all the great things that people are doing? I think we just have to be careful about that. What we notice, what we pay attention to.
Retraining our mind to notice the good things that are out there.
Yes. And as you say that, the other thing that came up a lot was doing good, right? So if you're stuck and you feel like maybe, you're a little more pessimistic, optimism doesn't come naturally to you, just trying out every now and then a random act of kindness can be very helpful. Being a helper, just look for a need and meet it for someone. That's huge.
We can make a difference. I think that's a barrier that people put in place and that they don't act. Some people don't vote because they're like, my vote doesn't count. My vote doesn't matter. Some people don't recycle because it's like, what does recycling really do? My recycling, my couple of bottles. And it's like, no, but when you put all that together, we can have optimistic future if we all say, what I do matters. Because what I do, I train my kids to do and my husband to do, and they'll train their kids and their husband, and then hopefully our friends, and then our friends will get more friends, and then we can all be doing good together. And that creates the future we want and
Absolutely.
we desire. So you matter. We matter. Our decisions matter. And then when we do that, we are part of the solution and not the problem. So it's really good. So we want to be more optimistic. We give. We're kind. And we change our focus. Our attention.
Yeah, and not even kind to others. I mean, of course, kind to others, but also kind to ourselves. You know, a big part of pessimism seems to be related to negative self-talk. And so you just have to be more aware of what are you saying to yourself? Would you say that to a friend? And just trying to be, you know, pay attention to that. And again, like you said, retrain your brain to be hopeful about the future, to be kind to yourself, to interpret behaviors of others in positive ways, give people the benefit of the doubt. You know, those are just kind of daily practical things we can all engage in.
And negative self-talk is a part. And I think you may not struggle with that every day, but we all have like moments like, but then you can say, today was not my day, but it will be tomorrow. So in those times, I mean, we have to be realistic of our failures. I guess this goes to talking to our next point. We're not creating these perfect worlds. We don't want to have toxic positivity because it
I was gonna say, right?
Go the other way.
Yeah, that's going to be totally a criticism of this message for some people, not to be pessimistic, right? But that's probably something that some people out there are wondering, like, what about toxic positivity? We can't just view the world as this, everything's going to be perfect and bad things aren't going to happen and blah, blah, blah. And I think we've made it clear that that's not what we're saying. And I also think that we really do, kind of under that umbrella of toxic positivity, recognize that there are some things that happen. There are some things about our world that are unfair and inequitable and that make this more difficult for people. Like racism exists, you know? Gender biases in the workplace exist. Like there are things that happen that make this everything's gonna turn out okay, feel hopeful about your future, more difficult for some groups of people. And I think we, you know, have to recognize that.
Exactly. But getting on to the point of toxic positivity would be that, you know, that we go into this world thinking that it's going to be roses and that we ignore the warning signs. And I think that over and over again, I feel like optimism is saying that there are going to be bad things, but good will come out of it.
Yeah.
But I'm not going to be the person who never looks at the bad that could come. Like I'm going to be aware of the bad and I'm going to try to fix the bad before it hurts me or hurts my family or hurts my pocketbook or whatnot. So optimism is that whatever happens, even if that bad thing does happen, then I'm still going to look for the good in that too.
Yeah, and be hopeful that in the future, overall, things are going to be okay.
And looking, say, hey, that did happen, but oh my goodness, I met that friend, or I'm so glad that I got to, I was just talking with a friend the other day and she started coming to our church and we've really connected. But something bad happened before she had to come to our church.
Yeah.
And I was just like, you know, that bad thing did it happened, but look at what the good.
Yeah.
You are here now and we love you. And I just can't imagine my life without you.
Right.
And so like that's optimism, is that things happen either on our own accord or but oh man, there's
good will come. Yeah.
And it just reminds me of that promise that I feel like we have in Jesus, like that Romans 8:28. It says that all things work together for the good of those who love him and called according to his purpose. So like we can, if we're called and we love God, he is working things out so that good can happen in it.
Yeah. Ugh, I love this one.
And we can all feed our optimism. Feed that part of our brain.
Yes.
Light it up.
Do it. Light it. Hashtag light it up.
I like that. That one actually might stick. You mean take care of your adrenals? Is good. It's not going to stick.
I'm a better hashtagger than you, but I'm optimistic that you can get better in the future.
Yes. Thank you for joining us for Because We Love You.